Now, with the announcement that theatres on Broadway will close their doors tonight and the Dow Jones continuing to fall, it seems that President Trump's Oval Office address last night has not calmed fears in the United States. Siobhan Kennedy is in Washington for us now. Siobhan.
Well, John, they say that a crisis can make or break a president. Think of George Bush's handling of Hurricane Katrina or President Roosevelt stepping in during the Great Depression. In that sense, Donald Trump's primetime address to the nation last night was really his big moment, his chance to show leadership, to calm things down, to show that he was in control. Well, that has spectacularly backfired. The markets went immediately into a tailspin. The Dow is currently down about 2,000 points, and he also simultaneously managed to insult the European leaders and at the same time send the travelling public into chaos. He's also hurt the airlines, who had no idea that his travel ban was imminent. What seems to be the big criticism here, John, is that he hasn't focused on public health, where Americans are desperate for information and testing kits. Instead, he has chosen in his own inimitable style to instead point the finger. A somber president addresses the nation.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak.
Facing criticism, he hasn't acted quickly enough. This was Donald Trump's moment, and he had a centerpiece ready to deliver.
To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
Americans returning home would be exempt from the travel ban, as would travellers coming from the UK, even though cases there are increasing. And the reason?
The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travellers from Europe.
So the president wasn't only banning the majority of Europeans, he was blaming them too. If the idea was to calm the nation and the markets, boy, did it have the opposite effect. As Wall Street opened in New York, shares tumbled, forcing an automatic shutdown for the second time in a week, a first in stock market history. There was anger in Europe too.
The European Union disapproves of the fact that the US decision to impose a travel ban was taken unilaterally and without consultation.
It kind of ruined my travel plans. I arrived here yesterday.
And on the ground, travel chaos after the president's unclear message even left Americans confused.
I think a lot of people panicked last night when it wasn't clear that American citizens could still return home. So I know a lot of people that were freaked out and trying to change their flights.
Professor Larry Gostin is one of the world's leading experts on government responses to pandemics like the coronavirus. And this was his verdict on the president's travel ban.
This doesn't make Americans safe at all. The epidemic here is just as bad, if not worse, than in most parts of Europe. This is a microbe, and you just can't erect travel bans and expect that you're going to be safe.
Being safe is about being tested early.
I want you to slowly turn around. I want to make sure that you have no gross contamination on you.
But across the US, medical units have struggled to access the test kits because manufacturing has been too slow. Production is now being ramped up, and the White House insists millions of test kits are on the way. But could it be too late?
China, South Korea, Japan have done, magnitudes of orders of more testing than in the United States. And we're no longer probably in a phase where we can contain it, where testing really helps you identify cases, isolate them, contact trace, put them in quarantine. We had that sweet spot, and the window of opportunity may have closed.
Sensing that, some districts like this one in New York are moving to mitigation, closing schools, cancelling mass gatherings and working from home. The president apparently worried that ordering those measures would be too alarmist. But in the absence of a clear message, across America, people are taking matters into their own hands, clearing the shelves in preparation for worse to come.
Well, a growing number of countries are imposing travel restrictions and quarantine measures. India has announced a suspension of all entry visas for a month, as well as restricting return travel for its citizens who are currently abroad. The Philippine capital, Manila, has quarantine measures in place, with travel in and out of the capital suspended. In the last 24 hours, Iran has reported over 1,000 new cases, and its death toll has risen to 429, with every province affected. Latin America's biggest airline is cutting 30% of its international flights because of falling demand. And Denmark has closed all its schools and universities, along with Norway, Greece, Lithuania and Slovakia. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman reports.
This was an empty Rome this morning. La Dolce Vita this is not. All bars, cafes and restaurants now joining schools and universities in closing shut. All non-essential travel is banned in Italy, and when a man fainted in the capital's main railway station, a team in protective clothing was filmed taking him away. Food shops are open, these queuing shoppers clearly well over the 1 metre apart required. Only a few people are allowed inside this delicatessen at any one time. The manager uses yellow tape to enforce a safe distance. Though with over 1,000 dead in Italy so far, he's certainly not complaining about doing his bit.
The government's doing its best. We're in a war against an invisible enemy, and our generation just isn't prepared for this type of situation.
In Spain, King Felipe and the entire Spanish cabinet have been tested for the coronavirus after the infection rate soared in a few days. Over 80 have died. Many schools have shut for a fortnight, and the Prime Minister is conducting future meetings via video link. France holds local elections this Sunday, but politicians have been told to avoid the usual kissing and handshakes. In Greece, the ceremony for the lighting of the Olympic flame looked like a vision from heaven, though without spectators and amid an urgent call by the Greek government for more doctors and nurses. There's speculation the Olympics in Tokyo in July will be postponed, and though the organisers insist that the Games are going ahead, Donald Trump has suggested a year's delay.
I like that better than I like having empty stadiums all over the place. I think if you cancel it, make it a year later, that's a better alternative than doing it with no crowd.
In Norway, they're following Denmark's lead by closing all schools and universities. Those involved in treating patients are forbidden from leaving the country until the end of next month. The Danes, with over 500 cases, are claiming one of the most dramatic increases anywhere in Europe. Public sector workers who aren't critical to the emergency response are being sent home. In Iran, the cabinet met wearing face masks. The surge in cases there has left over 10,000 ill, with more than 400 dead. This is a satellite image of a cemetery in the holy city of Qom, filmed last October. Back then, there was still burial space in the top right of the picture. But by last month, that space was filled with many more graves, suggesting a far higher death toll than officially claimed.
Well, the French President Emmanuel Macron has just been making a national address about the crisis. Jonathan Rugman has been watching it. Jonathan, bring us up to date on what he's been saying.
Well, the death toll in France has risen from 48 to 61 in the last 24 hours. And President Macron, in his address to the French people, has announced that all schools, universities and nurseries will be closed in France from Monday. And he hasn't put a date as to when they're going to reopen. He has said that young people are the most likely, the best spreaders of this virus. And those are the grounds on which he is closing schools and universities. He's also urged people aged 70 and above and the vulnerable, those with health issues, to stay at home for as long as possible. We know that 5 French MPs have the virus. The French culture minister has the virus. And it's pretty clear that the French are looking across the border at what is happening in Italy in particular, with 2,000 new cases reported today. And they've decided to go further and faster than they have before.